The whiteboard in conference room 4 had been wiped and rewritten so many times that faint black shadows stained the surface beneath the fresh ink. Numbers, arrows, equations, failed projections, 3 months, 12 engineers, hundreds of hours, still no answer. The atmosphere inside the room felt heavy enough to choke on. People were exhausted, frustrated, running in circles. Every meeting ended the same way. Another theory, another calculation, another dead end. The company's biggest project was stalled, and nobody seemed capable of moving it forward. A senior analyst rubbed his eyes. Someone else erased another section of the board. The sound of squeaking markers filled the room. Nobody looked confident anymore, not even the managers, especially not the managers. The door opened quietly. Maya stepped inside. No one turned. No one greeted her. No one even noticed she had entered. She simply walked toward the back row and sat down, like she always did. Invisible, comfortably ignored. 3 months earlier, a chart glowed on the screen. Maya raised her hand. I think the forecast. Derek clicked to the next slide. Without looking at her, without acknowledging she had spoken, the room followed him. The discussion moved on. Nobody asked what she was about to say. Nobody looked her way. For a moment, Maya kept her hand raised, waiting. Then she slowly lowered it. A few seats away, another analyst repeated the exact concern she had been about to mention. This time, everyone listened. Derek nodded. Good catch. Several people wrote it down. Maya looked at the table, said nothing. The meeting continued as if she had never spoken at all. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. After that meeting, Maya stopped raising her hand. Then she stopped offering suggestions. Eventually, people stopped asking what she thought altogether. Across the room, one of the engineers sighed loudly. Another scratched through an entire page of calculations and crumpled it into a ball. The paper landed in a trash bin already overflowing with failures. Maya watched quietly. Her expression never changed, because none of this was surprising. Not anymore. What nobody in the room knew, what nobody had known for the last 14 days, was that the solution already existed. The problem had already been solved by Maya 2 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday, during lunch. While everyone else crowded the cafeteria, Maya sat alone outside. While everyone else had been complaining about deadlines in the cafeteria, Maya had been sitting alone outside, a sandwich in one hand, a pen in the other, staring at a napkin covered in numbers. The equations wouldn't leave her alone, so she kept working. One adjustment, one correction, one missing relationship nobody else had noticed. And suddenly everything had clicked. The answer had appeared so fast, almost felt insulting. She remembered staring at the napkin, blinking twice, looking again, certain she had made a mistake. But she hadn't. The model worked perfectly, which somehow made it worse. The solution was real. It had been sitting in her desk drawer for the last 2 weeks, waiting, not because she was afraid, not because she lacked confidence, because for the first time in her life, Maya wanted to know something. If people only valued results, then what happened when the person they considered useless became the only one capable of saving them? At the front of the room, another engineer shook his head. We're stuck. The words echoed across the conference room. Several people looked defeated. Others looked angry. Nobody looked hopeful. Maya leaned back in her chair. Her fingers brushed against the folded napkin hidden inside her notebook. Still there, still carrying the answer everyone was desperately searching for. The answer that could change everything. The answer that could save the project. The answer that could save several careers, including the careers of people who had spent months making sure hers never advanced. For a brief moment, a small smile appeared on Maya's face. Not cruel, not bitter, just thoughtful, because she hadn't decided yet what was more satisfying. Watching them struggle, or letting them discover exactly how badly they had underestimated her. Maya had been hired as a data analyst. On paper, she was qualified. In the office, she barely existed. The first day had felt promising. A clean desk, a new laptop, a company badge with her name printed beneath her photo. For a few hours, she had allowed herself to believe this would be different. A fresh start, a place where hard work would matter, a place where results would speak louder than personalities. By the end of her first week, that illusion was already cracking. It happened during a strategy meeting. Maya had spent the previous evening reviewing performance data. She had found a discrepancy, nothing major, but important enough to mention. She raised her hand. The room barely noticed. Before she could finish her first sentence, someone laughed. Not maliciously. Worse, dismissively. Maybe sit this one out. A few people smiled. One model predicted profit. Another predicted disaster. The third predicted something in between. The board hated all three. Consultants were brought in. Expensive ones. Experts with impressive resumes. Experts whose hourly rates made people nervous. For 2 days, they reviewed the data. For 2 days, they questioned assumptions. For 2 days, they filled the room with technical language. Then they left. Without an answer. The The silence afterward felt heavier than their presentations. Thursday arrived, then Thursday afternoon, then Thursday evening. The deadline kept getting closer. The solution never did. At 8:17 p.m., the conference room looked nothing like it had that morning. Jackets draped over chairs. Empty coffee cups scattered across tables. Loose papers covered the floor. One analyst rubbed his temples continuously. Another stared blankly at a spreadsheet. A third had stopped pretending to work. He was simply watching the clock, waiting for a miracle or failure, whichever arrived first. Derek stood near the whiteboard. His sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened, a red marker in his hand. He erased another equation, rewrote it, stepped back, frowned, erased it again. Nobody challenged him. Nobody agreed with him either. The room had reached that dangerous stage where everyone was too exhausted to argue, too tired to think, too frustrated to see clearly. A graph filled the main projector screen. Lines rising, lines falling, forecasts colliding, risk curves crossing each other. People kept pointing at it, discussing it, defending it, attacking it. Nobody questioned whether the graph itself was wrong, because everyone assumed someone else had already checked. That assumption would become expensive. Outside the room, Maya walked quietly through the hallway, a folder tucked beneath her arm. Nothing urgent, nothing important, just paperwork, just another task, just another evening of being invisible. Most employees had already gone home. The building felt different at night, calmer, softer, the constant office noise replaced by distant air conditioning. Maya preferred it that way. The fewer people around, the easier it was to think. As she approached conference room 4, voices spilled into the hallway. Frustrated voices, tired voices, people talking over each other. She slowed her pace, not intentionally, just enough to glance through the glass wall. The entire team was inside. Derek, senior analysts, department leads, even executives. Everyone who mattered. Everyone except her. Maya looked down at the folder, then back at the room. A small hesitation. Nothing more. She stepped inside. Nobody noticed. The discussion continued. Someone pointed at the graph. Another disagreed. A third proposed changing assumptions. The room immediately rejected the idea. The argument shifted direction, then shifted again. The conversation sounded busy, but it wasn't moving. It was spinning. Maya quietly crossed the room, placed a folder on a side table. Her task was finished. She could have left, probably should have left. Instead, something caught her attention. A number, just one, buried inside the graph. Small, easy to overlook. Her eyes lingered. A few seconds, and a few more. The noise around her faded. The graph remained. The line, the ratio, the conversion factor. Something felt wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Dangerously wrong. The kind of mistake that hides because it almost looks correct. Maya took a step closer. Nobody noticed. Another step. Still nobody noticed. The room continued arguing. The graph continued sitting there. Patiently, silently, waiting for someone to realize it was lying. Maya's heartbeat slowed. That always happened when she focused. The chaos disappeared. The numbers became clearer. The relationships became clearer. Patterns emerged. Connections formed. The graph wasn't revealing the problem. The graph was the problem. A tiny error. One assumption. One calculation. One detail copied incorrectly weeks earlier. A mistake so small it looked harmless. A mistake large enough to destroy a multi-million-dollar contract. Maya stared at the screen, then at the exhausted faces around the room, then back at the graph. For 3 months, they had been chasing the wrong answer. For 3 months, they had been asking the wrong question. And suddenly, she knew exactly why. It's the regional tax variable, Maya said. At the far end of the room, the CEO said nothing. But unlike everyone else, he didn't look surprised. His expression barely changed, as if he had just seen confirmation of something he had suspected for a very long time. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. The conference room fell silent anyway. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Markers froze above whiteboards. Several heads turned at once. For a moment, nobody seemed to understand what had happened, because Maya never interrupted meetings, never challenged senior analysts, never inserted herself into discussions. Most people had forgotten she was even standing there. Now every eye in the room was on her. The sudden attention felt strange, almost uncomfortable. Maya remained still. The projector continued humming softly. A spreadsheet glowed across the screen. Rows of numbers, columns of assumptions. 3 months of confusion. 3 months of frustration. 3 months of people searching in the wrong direction. A senior analyst blinked. Another slowly lowered his coffee cup. Someone near the back exchanged a confused look with a coworker. Nobody spoke. Not yet. Derek finally turned around. Slowly, the red marker remained in his hand. His expression carried the same look people often had when they heard something impossible. Not disbelief. Recognition. The uncomfortable realization that someone might be right. How would you? He stopped. The question never fully formed. Maya's eyes moved toward the graph. Toward the tiny section nobody else had questioned. Toward the mistake. The mistake that had quietly poisoned every calculation afterward. I noticed it 3 months ago. Silence. The sentence landed harder than she intended. A few people straightened in their chairs. Others looked away. Suddenly everyone remembered something. Meetings. Emails. Reports. Questions she had asked. Observations she had made. Comments nobody bothered following up on. A manager frowned. Tried to remember. Tried to convince himself he would have noticed. The truth was simpler. Nobody had listened. Maya glanced around the room. Not angry. Not bitter. Just tired. I just didn't think anyone would listen. Silence again. A different kind this time. Heavier. Because nobody could argue with it. The room remembered. The interruptions. The dismissals. The unfinished sentences. The way conversations always moved on before Maya could finish speaking. One analyst looked down at the table. Embarrassed. Another suddenly found the whiteboard fascinating. Nobody wanted to be the first person to react. Derek swallowed. His confidence seemed smaller now. Less solid. Less certain. The room had spent months treating Maya like a junior employee who needed supervision. Now she was standing in front of a problem 12 engineers couldn't solve. And she sounded absolutely certain. Not hopeful. Not guessing. Certain. That was what made everyone nervous. Derek stepped toward the screen. His eyes narrowed. He zoomed in on the section Maya had indicated. The room watched. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Numbers filled the display. Rows. Percentages. Variables. Formulas. At first glance, everything looked normal. Then Derek's expression changed. Only slightly. But Maya noticed. The exact moment he saw it. The exact moment realization arrived. His shoulders stiffened. His jaw tightened. His eyes stopped moving. Because now he could see it too. The update. September. The framework revision. The outdated tax assumption. Tiny. Almost invisible. Yet connected to everything. One wrong variable. One incorrect dependency. One flaw. Large enough to corrupt the entire pricing model. The entire room watched Derek. Waiting. A senior consultant slowly leaned forward. Another opened his laptop again. Someone reached for a calculator. The room suddenly felt awake. After months of dead ends, everyone sensed movement. The possibility of an answer. Derek clicked through several sheets. Then several more. His pace increased. The confidence disappeared. Urgency replaced it. People exchanged glances. Nobody spoke. The room was no longer questioning Maya. Now, they were checking if she was right, which felt very different. Maya stood quietly near the door. Exactly where she had been before. Exactly where nobody noticed her. Only now she wasn't invisible anymore. Now people kept looking at her, trying to understand how she had seen something they hadn't. Trying to understand when that happened. Trying to understand who she actually was. A minute passed, then another. The room remained silent except for keyboards clicking. Calculations running. Sheets updating. Numbers refreshing. Then suddenly one analyst sat upright. Eyes wide. His monitor reflected against his glasses. Oh, the word slipped out before he could stop it. Another analyst stared at his own screen. Then another. The same reaction spread around the room. One by one. Like dominoes. Because every recalculation led to the same place. The same conclusion. The same answer. The model worked. The contract worked. The numbers aligned. For the first time in 3 months, everything made sense. Nobody celebrated. Not immediately. The realization was too shocking. The solution had been there all along. Not hidden inside consultant reports. Not buried in executive reviews. Not discovered by the senior team. It had been sitting quietly inside the mind of the one person nobody bothered listening to. And suddenly, the most invisible person in the company had become the most important person in the room. Maya took a slow step forward. Then another. The conference room remained silent. Nobody stopped her. Nobody questioned her. Nobody even seemed capable of speaking. The whiteboard stood in front of her, covered in failed attempts. Crossed out formulas. Half-erased calculations. Layers of frustration built over 3 exhausting months. It looked less like a solution, more like a battlefield. Maya set her notebook on the table, picked up a marker. For a brief moment, she simply stared at the board. Not because she needed time to think, because she was remembering. Every meeting, every interruption, every time she had raised her hand, every time someone talked over her, every time she was treated like she didn't belong there. The marker touched the board. A quiet squeak filled the room. One line disappeared. A number changed. Nothing dramatic. Nothing complicated. Just one correction. Then another. The room watched. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. Maya's hand moved calmly across the board. No hesitation. No uncertainty. No second-guessing. The same confidence people usually expected from consultants charging thousands of dollars per hour. Except Maya wasn't performing. She already knew the answer. She had known it for weeks. The marker moved again. One assumption adjusted. One variable shifted. One dependency restored. Tiny changes. Tiny enough that most people would never have noticed them. Yet every correction seemed to pull the entire model back into place. Like pieces of a puzzle finally reconnecting. A senior analyst frowned, then straightened suddenly. He could see it now. Another grabbed his calculator. His fingers started moving. Fast. A third analyst opened a spreadsheet. Entered the updated figures. The room filled with rapid keyboard clicks. Nobody was looking at Maya anymore. Now they were looking at the numbers. Because the numbers were finally behaving. The graph on the projector screen updated. One line shifted. Then another. Then another. The risk curve stabilized. Profit forecasts aligned. Projection conflicts disappeared. Several people leaned forward simultaneously. Someone whispered something under his breath. Another person quietly muttered, "No way." The consultant nearest the screen stopped typing. Stared. Typed again. Checked the formula. Ran the calculation a second time. The result didn't change. His eyes widened. Maya continued writing. Calm. Methodical. Unhurried. The room felt frozen around her. Only the sound of the marker remained. 3 months of confusion. 3 months of arguments. 3 months of expensive meetings. Being dismantled in less than 60 seconds. The realization spread slowly. Then all at once, one analyst looked at another. The second analyst looked at the screen. The third analyst looked back at the whiteboard. Nobody could find a mistake. Because there wasn't one. For the first time in months, the model made sense. The marker left the board. Maya stepped back. Finished. That was it. No dramatic presentation. No speech. No explanation. Just an answer. Clean. Simple. Correct. Silence swallowed the room. The whiteboard looked different now. The equations flowed naturally. The relationships connected. The logic was obvious. Painfully obvious. The kind of obvious that only appears after someone else points it out. A few seconds passed. Then 10. Then 20. Nobody spoke. People simply stared. At the board. At their screens. At the calculations. Searching desperately for a flaw. For something they could challenge. Something they could question. They found nothing. The contract was saved. The projections worked. The numbers aligned. Everything aligned. One executive slowly lowered his glasses. Another sat back in his chair. The tension that had lived in the room for weeks suddenly disappeared. Not completely, just enough for people to breathe again. Across the table, one analyst actually laughed. Not because something was funny, because relief had finally arrived. The kind of relief that makes people realize how exhausted they really are. Several others followed. Small nervous smiles. Quiet disbelief. A consultant shook his head, almost embarrassed. 3 days of work, and she'd solved it in under a minute. The room wasn't just impressed. The room was stunned. Near the projector, Derek remained motionless. His marker still hung loosely in his hand. He hadn't spoken once. Hadn't moved. Had barely blinked. His eyes remained locked on the whiteboard. Trying to understand what had just happened. Trying to understand how he had missed it. Trying to understand how everyone had missed it. Slowly, his gaze shifted from the equations to the corrected graph, to the updated projections, and finally, to Maya. For months, he had looked past her, around her, through her. Now he looked directly at her. Really looked, as if seeing her for the very first time. Not the quiet analyst. Not the junior employee. Not the woman he dismissed. The person who had just solved the biggest problem in the company. The person who had done it while everyone else failed. The person he had underestimated from the moment she arrived. Maya noticed the look. She had imagined this moment before. Many times. Thought it would feel satisfying. Victorious. Maybe even sweet. Instead, it felt strangely quiet. Because the thing she wanted most wasn't revenge. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't recognition. It was something much simpler. For the first time since joining the company, the room was finally listening. Monday morning felt different. Not because the building had changed. Not because the office looked different. Because people did. Maya noticed at the moment the elevator doors opened. Conversation stopped. Only briefly. But she noticed. Heads turned. A few employees smiled nervously. Others suddenly became very interested in their phones. Several people who had never spoken to her before nodded as she walked past. One even held the door open. 3 days earlier, nobody would have noticed if she entered the building. Now, everyone noticed. The difference felt strange. Almost unreal. Maya walked through the lobby, carrying her usual coffee. Same cup. Same routine. Same quiet expression. But the atmosphere around her had changed completely. Whispers followed her through the hallways. Not cruel whispers. Curious ones. People looked. Then looked again. Trying to connect the quiet analyst They thought they knew with the person who had saved the company's biggest contract. The story had spread over the weekend. Of course it had. Stories always spread, especially the unexpected ones, especially when they embarrassed important people. A few employees stopped talking as she passed. Others pretended not to stare. One manager actually stood up from his desk. "Morning, Maya." The greeting sounded overly enthusiastic, almost rehearsed. Maya smiled politely, kept walking. The same people who once ignored her now seemed desperate to be noticed by her. Funny how quickly things changed. The elevator opened on the executive floor, a floor Maya had never visited before, at least not officially. The carpet looked newer, the lighting softer, the offices larger. Even the air felt different. Her footsteps slowed, not from nervousness, from disbelief. At the far end of the hallway stood a glass office. Her office. A small plaque rested beside the door. Maya Thompson, Senior Strategic Data Analyst. The title still looked unfamiliar. She read it twice, then once more. A tiny smile appeared, not because of the title, because of what it represented. For months, she'd been fighting to be heard. Now her name was literally on the door. Inside, sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The desk was larger, the chair newer. A second monitor had already been installed. Someone had even placed fresh flowers near the window. Maya laughed softly. The flowers felt unnecessary, but thoughtful. She set her coffee down, ran her fingers across the edge of the desk. A strange feeling settled inside her chest. Not triumph, not revenge, validation. The kind that arrives quietly, the kind that doesn't need applause. A knock interrupted the moment. Maya turned. Derek stood outside. For a second, neither moved. Neither spoke. The memory of Thursday still lingered between them. The whiteboard, the silence, the realization. Derek looked different today. Less certain, less guarded, almost uncomfortable. He held a folder beneath his arm. The irony wasn't lost on Maya. For months, he'd been the one deciding what information she received. Now he looked like someone asking permission to enter. "Come in." Derek stepped inside. His eyes briefly wandered across the office, then back to her. For a moment, it seemed like he wanted to say something important. An apology, an explanation, maybe both. Instead, he simply nodded, then handed her the folder. "We'd like your review before the board meeting." Your review, not assistance, not support, not help. Your review. The difference mattered. Maya accepted the folder. Derek hesitated, then left. The door closed quietly behind him. The office became silent again. Maya sat down, opened the folder. Halfway through the first page, she smiled. Not because the work impressed her, because she had already identified 3 issues. 3 issues nobody else had seen. Again, some things never changed. An hour later, an email arrived. Then another. Then 5 more. Meeting invitations, review requests, questions, recommendations. People suddenly wanted her opinion. People suddenly valued her expertise. People suddenly remembered she existed. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so predictable. Shortly before lunch, she entered the boardroom. This time nobody ignored her. Nobody interrupted her. Nobody took her seat. Several executives stood as she entered. One even pulled out a chair for her. Maya almost laughed. The contrast was absurd. At the far end of the table sat the CEO, older, sharp-eyed, observant. He had remained mostly silent during Thursday's crisis. Today he watched her carefully. The meeting moved quickly. Questions, forecasts, strategies. Every few minutes, someone turned toward Maya. Waiting, listening, actually listening. By the end of the meeting, the CEO leaned back in his chair. His fingers tapped lightly against the table. The room fell quiet. Then he asked the question nobody had thought to ask for 3 months. The question that should have been asked on her first day. What else do you know that we never asked about? The CEO held her gaze for a moment. Then he opened a drawer beside him. A familiar folder appeared. Maya recognized it immediately. One of her old reports. The original version, not Derek's edited version. Her version. The CEO placed it on the table. "I read this 2 months ago." The room fell silent. "I've been wondering ever since why nobody else did." The CEO's eyes briefly moved toward Derek, just for a second, but everyone in the room noticed. For the first time that day, Derek looked genuinely uncomfortable. Several executives exchanged glances, waiting, curious, almost nervous. Maya looked around the room, at the people who once overlooked her, at the people now waiting for her answer. Then she smiled, a calm smile, a knowing smile, the kind of smile that made people realize they might have underestimated her far more than they thought. Without saying a word, Maya reached in her bag, pulled pulled out a thick folder, then placed it gently on the table. The sound echoed through the room. Several executives leaned forward. The CEO raised an eyebrow. The folder wasn't thin. It wasn't small. It wasn't empty. It contained months of observations, months of overlooked risks, months of missed opportunities, months of problems nobody knew existed, and solutions nobody had bothered asking for. Maya rested her hand on top of it, still smiling, because the contract had never been the only thing she'd solved. It was simply the first thing they finally listened to,